Good evening, night travelers, and welcome to Rosewater Revelations, a quiet corner of the ether where candlelit history slips into our headphones like warm tea on a chilled hand. While you settle into pillows and blankets, or perhaps glide beneath street lamps on a nighttime walk, feel free to close your eyes and let me know in the comments below which city, hamlet, or hillside you are listening from. The map we weave together night after night forms its own constellation, and your single flicker of light helps outline our shared sky. Tonight, we draw the first curtain on a 10-chapter exploration titled Shadow Guardians of Victorian Courtship, a 120-minute deep dive into chaperone etiquette. Across the coming episodes, we will meander through fragrant gardens, dimly lit parlors, and bustling railway platforms, following the invisible lines of propriety that once bound hearts and reputations. But for now, breathe in slowly, for Chapter 1 offers a gentle overture, a cinematic still life observed through the languid rhythm of a dream. Imagine this as the opening sequence of a period film whose credits glide across panes of fogged glass. You do not need to memorize dates or legislation yet. Simply allow images, muffled conversations, and the faint rustle of satin to wash over you in a hush. Soft footfalls, a conservatory at twilight. Ferns droop under the moist breath of hidden boilers, while lamplight refracts through domed glass, painting the tiled floor in wavering emeralds. Music from the ballroom beyond filters in, muted by palms and glossy philodendron leaves. Within this feverish greenhouse, an assembly of guests meanders between orange trees and hothouse orchids, the air perfumed and heavy, like a secret kept too long. A young gentleman, Major Nathaniel Harrow, stands near a marble basin where koi twist languorously. His hair, still disheveled from cavalry drills, has been coaxed into respectable waves, yet a single lock rebels at his brow. He fingers a velvet ring box in his pocket. Across the tiled aisle drifts Miss Eleanor Willoughby, pearl combs glinting in her dusk-brown hair. She whispers with her cousin about the rumored engagement of another, scarcely aware how her own destiny teeters upon the brink. Brass band strains swell from the ballroom, then stall, as if the conductor himself is holding a breath. In that pause, Nathaniel edges through the green drapery of potted palms. Between him and Eleanor swirls a small throng. Dowagers fluttering fans, scholars praising the chrysanthemum collection, a quartet of bored officers reliving skirmishes in the Khyber Pass. Threads of conversation rise and fold back on themselves like silk being packed away. Nathaniel charts a course, his boots tap quietly across mosaic tiles depicting vines and night-blooming flowers. One tap, two taps, then a sudden hush. He meets resistance in the form of an older lady, Mrs. Arabella Forsyth, her gray curls pinned with a jet comb, her gloves pristine despite the humid air. She is no mere passerby. She is Eleanor's appointed guardian tonight, though the term is never voiced aloud in polite company. Nathaniel steps left. Mrs. Forsyth mirrors him. He inclines politely. She cocks her head, answering courtesy with scrutiny. The ring box, warm now, presses against his palm like a restless bird. Nathaniel bows, asks if Miss Willoughby might take some air beneath the farther arch. Mrs. Forsyth's eyes soften, almost, but they flick toward Eleanor, who is now being drawn into a conversation about lily hybrids and vital statistics. A beat passes. Steam from a radiator hisses. A droplet glides down the inside of a pane, racing its own reflection. Then, in a movement so slight it could be mistaken for the settling of lace, Mrs. Forsyth raises one gloved hand, pale kid leather, pearl buttons at the wrist, and places it between Nathaniel's chest and the path to Eleanor's. It is neither rude nor overly forceful. Rather, it is authoritative in its stillness, the embodiment of a social semaphore. Carriages may not proceed. Nathaniel's breath falters. Around them, guests drift by in slow motion, their laughter muffled by humidity. Time elongates like the glass roof stretched above. He imagines kneeling on this mosaic floor, presenting the ring, hearing a whispered yes. Instead, he stands caught in an unspoken stalemate, a dance of intentions turned to stone. Eleanor glances over, meeting Nathaniel's eyes for a heartbeat, but the older lady's intercepting silhouette refracts their gaze into a prism of what-ifs. Across the conservatory, an orchid sheds a single petal, which spirals downward in languid circles until it lands, soundless, upon the water's mirrored skin. The koi mouth it curiously, decide against, and drift away. So too, the moment drifts. The band resumes, launching into a quadrille, and the company trickles back toward the ballroom. Mrs. Forsyth gently, almost imperceptibly, inclines her head toward Nathaniel. "Thank you for understanding," and escorts her charge away. The ring box remains closed in Nathaniel's trembling fingers. He exhales, slow, resigned, invisible against the misted glass, and turns toward a side door that spills him into night air sharp with February frost. In one breath held between two pounding hearts, the existence of a single word changed everything. Chaperone, an ever-vigilant sentinel whose gloved restraint preserves virtue, shields reputations, and with one poised gesture can silence the beating wings of a proposal before they make a sound. Within that single definition lies the stakes of our study. For male and female protagonists of Victorian society, honor functioned like a fragile pane in that very conservatory roof, translucent enough to reveal aspirations, yet one careless tap could shatter it beyond repair. For a young woman, unchaperoned proximity to a suitor risked whispers that could exile her from the coveted marriage market, where dowries and alliances were traded with the cold precision of stock shares. For a gentleman, being observed in too eager pursuit might brand him opportunistic, fortune-hunting, or, worse, ungoverned by the iron code of discretion. Families invested fortunes in debut seasons. A single rumor could depreciate that investment overnight. And still, behind this stern calculus throbbed genuine affection, longing glances, handwritten notes secreted into pianoforte benches. To navigate between authenticity and propriety, lovers enlisted or eluded the shadow guardians we call chaperones. Over the next 9 chapters, we shall trace the lineage of this institution. We will unfurl its medieval antecedents and examine how Enlightenment philosophy reframed female agency while paradoxically tightening social reins. We will slip into the 1840s to observe Lady Blessington's salons, glide through the Great Exhibition of 1851, where glass and steel mirrored changing morals, pause at railway stations where etiquette handbooks struggled to keep pace with locomotives outrunning custom. You will hear courtroom testimonies from breach of promise cases, read diary entries revealing clandestine rendezvous, and compare them to modern campus escort policies that echo Victorian vigilance in surprising ways. Some moments will feel quaint, others disturbingly current. Always the human tremor, heart reaching toward heart, will pulse beneath our scholarly lens. If at any point you find yourself drifting into sleep, fear not. The narrative is designed to be porous, allowing dreams to slip in and stitch their own patterns alongside factual embroidery. Like moonlight diluted through gauze curtains, each detail can dissolve without urgency. You will find it again upon waking, patiently awaiting your return. Our next chapter will unspool in a Mayfair drawing room, where letter-writing desks, calling cards, and the unwritten arithmetic of morning calls reveal the preparatory sphere in which chaperones calibrated social exposure long before courtship ever reached the fevered hush of a conservatory. For now, let the image linger. A single gloved hand, suspended between two hearts, halting the momentum of a proposal the way one presses a moth between glass, delicate, decisive, and irreversible. In that moment, the world itself seemed to pause. So may it pause for you now, settling you into a tranquil drift where the lantern light of history burns soft and low. Sleep, if you wish, beneath stained glass shadows that rustle like palm leaves, and when you wake, we shall resume our gentle investigation where lace meets iron and feeling meets form. As the last candle of Chapter 1 guttered into a quiet pool of wax, its tremulous flame sketched the outline of an unseen sentinel, a presence that promises both protection and restraint. Let us keep that small, wavering glow in mind as we drift backward through the centuries, because the idea of a watchful guardian hovering over private meetings did not spring fully formed in the high-ceilinged parlors of Queen Victoria's reign. It is, rather, an old root system curled deep beneath English social history, absorbing laws, legends, scandals, and moral anxieties, long before a single visiting card was cut to regulation size. Imagine first the medieval Great Hall, smoky and resonant like a stone throat at dusk. Here, in a world organized by feudal obligation, marriages were corporate alliances, knit chiefly for property and dynastic security. Daughters were wards of their fathers in a literal legal sense. Their persons, like their dowries, belonged to the manor's ledger. The guardian's authority, expressed in charters and confirmed by church courts, was broad enough to veto a suitor, annul an irregular promise, or even claim custody of the bride's inheritance until she bore a male heir. This early guardianship was emphatically public. Banquet benches ran lengthwise beneath oak beams, the hearth's light was communal, and eyes were everywhere. Stewards, reeves, nurses, confessors. Privacy, that soft cloak lovers later sought, was still a rarity, and so the proto-chaperone operated less as a single person than as a lattice of custom and surveillance we might call the hall itself. Drift now toward the 15th century. Chivalric literature, epopées of courtly love, sang of clandestine trysts by moonlit battlements, yet even those romances usually smuggled in a duenna figure, the maid who stands aside with folded arms while her lady, briefly unattended, exchanges a token. Stories mirror worries. If poets felt obliged to write the duenna into the tapestry, then households felt obliged to appoint her. Manor rolls tell us of gentlewomen traveling with governesses during pilgrimages or royal progresses. These caretakers bore responsibility not only for sewing and French conversation, but also for safeguarding virtue, a quality measured less by internal conviction than by external rumor. In medieval Europe, reputation was a fragile currency transferable across generations, and the guardian was its living lockbox. Fast forward to the Tudor court, that glittering theater of silk, intrigue, and volatile allegiances. Henry VIII's matrimonial dramas threw into sharp relief the peril that an unmarried woman, especially one connected to power, might represent. The royal household thus codified a hierarchy of female supervision: mistress of the maids, mother of the maids, and a retinue of gentlewomen. The household ordinances of 1526 read like a choreography of proximity: no damsel to visit the king's lodgings unless accompanied, no letter to be delivered save through the lady mistress's hand. Observe Catherine Howard's fall, her youthful indiscretions fanned into scandal by jealous courtiers, and you glimpse the cost of a breach in that system. Tudor biography often pivots on who overheard a whisper, who glimpsed a clasped hand. Out of such stories emerged the tacit rule that an honorable woman must be seen, quite literally, to be watched. We drift across a century's tide to the late Georgian drawing room, scented with orris powder and scandal sheets. Britain's cities are swelling. Assembly rooms in Bath and pleasure gardens at Vauxhall provide space for flirtation beyond ancestral walls. The age prizes sentiment, yet it also thrills to gossip. High-profile elopements ignite the popular press: Elizabeth Lamb, Lady Melbourne's escapades, the clandestine marriage of the future George IV to Maria Fitzherbert, Lord Byron's serpentine affairs. Each narrative arrives wrapped in hand-colored caricatures from Cruikshank or Gilray, exaggerating the wide-eyed innocence of ingenues and the cynical smirks of rakes. Public appetite for such prints is ravenous, and their moral is plain. Reputations can be ruined overnight while the tun still toasts its claret. Parents, rattled by these cautionary tales, answer with stricter oversight. The term chaperone, borrowed from the French word for a falconer's hood, begins to migrate into English usage. To caper in the glare of gossip is to invite ruin. Better to glide under the protective wing. Yet the decisive shift will come not from dukes, but from drapers and barristers, the swelling, moral middle class. Industrial prosperity furnishes new parlors, rosewood pianofortes, and china shepherdesses, but it also demands a thread of respectability on which every maiden's future dangles. The evangelical revival preaches self-command. The Reform Act of 1832 enlarges the electorate and, with it, the argument that civic virtue springs from domestic virtue. Enter the cult of domesticity, that honeyed doctrine pronouncing home the woman's ordained province and purity her shining badge. Anxious parents internalize sermons warning that a daughter's misstep will blacken not just her name, but the balance sheets of marriage possibilities. Social energy therefore funnels into a preventive mechanism. The family friend, elder sister, or widowed aunt who accompanies outings, steers conversation, and, crucially, stands ready to swear, if ever called upon, that nothing improper transpired. Etiquette manuals bloom like night-fragrant flowers to guide this sense of duty. Lord Chesterfield's letters to his son, first privately circulated, then widely reprinted, offers not quite chaperonage, but plenty of hints about avoiding the familiar. By 1811, The Mirror of the Graces addresses itself to the female sex in the bloom of youth and beauty, advising that carriage rides must include a steady older companion. In 1834, Mrs. C.B. Wilson's The Polite Visitor outlines acceptable distances between armchairs, recommending that a chaperone seat herself strategically to intercept whispers. Such books belong as much to performance as to principle. They map a courteous geometry, how many steps from ballroom door to supper table, where a matron should hover on the stair, to make visible the moral architecture hitherto implicit. Pause here, where inked curlicues dry on gilt-edged pages. A hush lies over the library, yet outside, 1830s London quickens like a restless heart. Railways extend glistening tracks toward Euston, omnibuses clatter in widening circles, gaslights ghost the Strand into wakefulness long after midnight. New anonymity stalks the capital. A couple can meet between stations, slip unnoticed through fog, vanish into thronged arcades. Gin palaces glare with mirrors and chandeliers, inviting blurred boundaries. This labyrinth of movement and neonish shimmer threatens the tidy moral grid sketched by etiquette authors. Where once reputation was policed by village memory, now the metropolis swallows secrets whole. No wonder periodicals counsel that a young lady must carry not only her reticule, but also a vigilant companion whose presence translates into an unspoken affidavit of propriety. Consider a hypothetical Mayfair afternoon, circa 1838. Miss Lydia Penhaligon receives an invitation to stroll in Kensington Gardens with Mr. Sethwick, a junior partner in her uncle's banking firm. Etiquette dictates that she may accept only if accompanied by her cousin's widowed mother, Aunt Dorothea, whose rheumy eyes miss little. They join the Sunday parade of silks and canes, Aunt Dorothea's pace measured, umbrella precisely angled so that chatter remains audible but never confidential. Along the Serpentine, Mr. Sethwick attempts an anecdote from the House of Commons gallery. He leans in, Aunt Dorothea tilts her ear horn. The anecdote blooms with parliamentary decorum. Squirrels scurry, swans preen, and the tableau confirms to onlookers that every sentiment exchanged has passed through matronly audit. Thus does the chaperone function as moral notarization, a stamp that Mr. Sethwick may later brandish when seeking Lydia's hand. The chaperone's presence is not always a burden. Sometimes it is a masquerade that allows intimacy to flourish under a cloak of formality. A ride through Hyde Park's Rotten Row with an older relative perched behind transforms an otherwise unthinkable tête-à-tête into a respectable lecture on equestrian posture. A box at Drury Lane shared with a widowed neighbor offers darkness enough for quickened pulses, but also a reassuring silhouette to deflect prying lorgnettes. Like the falconer's hood, the chaperone does not blind romance so much as temper its flight, ensuring it returns safely to the wrist. Yet let us not sanctify every guardian. Diaries whisper of overzealous aunts who torpedo suitable matches out of prejudice, or of complacent companions bribed with lace gloves to look the other way. Comedy of manners thrives on such foibles. Still, the dominant impulse remains protective, and its success is measured not in drama, but in the quiet trajectory from debut to altar, unmarred by rumor. By mid-century, the role will ossify into officialdom. Cards engraved, Mrs. Fairfax accompanies, and any breach will invite reproof in the columns of the Times or the snide italics of Punch. We have wandered, candle in hand, from medieval hearth to gaslit boulevard, noticing how each era bequeathed its anxieties to the next. The common thread runs like gold filament, a culture's fear that desire, left alone, will unravel social fabric, and thus must be watched, stewarded, ceremonially framed. In the next chapter, we shall linger within the newly minted parlors of early Victorian London, listening to the rustle of visiting gowns and the measured tick of mantel clocks, to see how these inherited rituals settle into daily routine. The gaslit memory of Chapter 2 lingers in a hush of paling amber, as if the city itself were reluctant to rouse the guardians of romance from their velvet watch. Against that half-lit backdrop, the rules now glide forward, not as iron bars, but as gossamer ribbons, defining whom society trusts to keep tender impulses from bursting into flame. Each ribbon loops around a singular figure, the chaperone. Age, marital status, reputation, and temperament are weighed like pearls on a scale. Only when every bead reflects spotless does the household breathe easily and declare the appointment proper beyond polite doubt. Acceptable guardians most commonly emerge from the concentric rings of kinship: a widowed aunt possessing unimpeachable calm, an elder sister already securely wed, or a godmother with a duchess's poise. Such figures wear the mantle with little strain. A father or brother may serve, yet masculine vigilance invites whispers of severity, so ladies generally prefer a female escort seasoned in nuance. Servants rarely suffice. Their social inferiority renders them invisible, and invisibility breeds opportunity. The accompanying presence must be plainly seen, must command a quiet orbit of respect, and must herself remain beyond the appetite of gossip's hungering tongues forever. With the guardian identified, the hour becomes the next sentinel. Morning. Strolls along public terraces invite only the lightest supervision, for daylight itself acts as deterrent. Afternoon visits are moderate, requiring the chaperone to hover within earshot while reviewing embroidery, newspapers, or the clouds. But twilight tilts the scales. Once the sun departs, propriety steels itself. In ballrooms, a matron is expected to survey the sweep of polished floor from a strategic chair, rising only to exchange partners or to refresh her charge with lemonade. She records every dance, silently noting whether any gentleman's interest lengthens beyond custom that night. Carriage rides present a subtler geometry of distance and shadow. In an open barouche by midday, 3 occupants suffice: maiden, suitor, and chaperone seated opposite, parasol tilted like an accusing eye. Curtains, however, change the arithmetic. A closed brougham after dusk demands a 4th soul, often a footman perched beside coachman, lest the confined space be mistaken for permission. The seating chart within draws invisible chalk lines. A maiden anchors the near corner. The suitor occupies the diagonal. The chaperone claims the remaining seat, converting upholstery into social barricade. Conversation must rise no higher than wheels on gravel, steady and unhurried always. In the gilt-edged parlor, words travel precise spans. Etiquette cards of the period, several now drifting across the screen, illustrate concentric circles around a tea table. Intimate, moderate, public. Suitors and maidens inhabit only the moderate ring, measured at 1 yard, permitting voices to soften while denying the tremor of a shared whisper. Closer proximity belongs exclusively to betrothed couples or to doctors with stethoscopes. Chairs therefore angle rather than converge. Knees must never align. Conversation floats on neutral currents. Weather, novels, charitable bazaars, each topic chosen for buoyancy, lest unguarded depth pulls sentences into romantic undertow where silence tastes of rosewater. Outdoor encounters broaden the permissible radius, yet not infinitely. In formal gardens, the length of a mulch path, roughly 6 paces, may separate gentleman and lady, provided the chaperone strolls parallel, her slight distance granting privacy while still a turn of the head away. The rustle of leaves substitutes for window glass, but wind also carries voices. Thus remarks must be pitched to reach exactly the intended ear and no further. Courtship becomes an exercise in acoustics, the note of admiration struck like a tuning fork so that it fades against hedges before eavesdroppers shape it into rumor on the breath of twilight. The tapestry of restraint may appear delicate, yet any torn filament resounds through drawing rooms like a snapped piano string. The first penalty is the raised eyebrow, almost imperceptible, but chronicled in mental ledgers. Next come teacup vibrations of whispered conjecture, clinking from aunt to cousin during luncheons. Should impropriety persist, an unchaperoned bench by the Serpentine, a carriage curtain drawn too soon, the gossip is committed to paper. Unsigned notes, margin scribbles in circulating library novels, column inches in weeklies. Eventually the thunder reaches the matrimonial market. Prospects retreat. Invitations vanish. A crest may remain, yet its polish dulls irretrievably for decades. Complete social ruination is rarer, yet the possibility haunts every lace cuff. When a breach transgresses the invisible red line, perhaps an unsupervised weekend at a country house or the discovery of a clandestine engagement ring, the gossip crystallizes into verdict. Marriage may still rescue the lady, but only if the gentleman stands willing. If he withdraws, her name becomes the thread others avoid touching, fearing stain by association. Charities decline her assistance. Dressmakers require prepayment. Even church pews shift subtly as congregants rearrange their spines. The once simple art of being seen turns to choreography of discreet exit routes in silent shame. To understand how these threads were taught, one may consult the printed oracles of the era. Chromolithographed etiquette cards, softly sepia tonight, depict demure silhouettes. Along the bottom margin, looping copperplate instructs, not less than 18 inches apart. Beside them lie glossy clippings from the Queen, the Ladies' Cabinet, and lesser monthlies reporting on court presentations. Tiny engravings show a chaperone's vigilant profile in the rear of a landau, monocle flashed like lighthouse beam. These visual aids functioned as pocket-sized constables, reinforcing lessons at every glance. Ink and cardstock thus policed hearts as firmly as any living guardian or portrait. Viewed together, characters, hours, distances, and penalties form a celestial mechanics of affection, planets kept in ordered orbit, lest collision creates scandal's blazing comet. Each participant carries an almanac in the mind, adjusting speed and heading whenever a door opens or a candle is lit. Chaperones observe, couples modulate, bystanders record. Occasionally, genuine love slips through the grid, harmless when mutual, explosive when unbalanced. Yet society prefers calculation to risk. Better a dozen thwarted romances than a single tarnished lineage. Thus the rulebook persists, copied in diaries, whispered across sewing circles, lingering even when daylight dissolves the printed ink itself. Night now thickens, and the rules seem to drowse as well, pages turning slower, ribbons slackening at their knots. In the hush, footsteps of past matrons can almost be heard padding down wallpapered corridors, satisfied that every window latch is secure. The rustle of crinolines settles like moth wings, while carriages roll homeward through mist-laden squares. Lamps dim, yet their afterglow lingers inside the closed eyes of those who once danced under them. The etiquette cards rest atop escritoires, colors muted, awaiting dawn when scrutiny resumes. Sleep overlays the rulebook the way moonlight overlays stone, soft, cold, exquisitely patient and listening. Come earliest morning, however, silence will quiver with coded signals, a fluttering fan, a dropped glove, a bouquet tilted at telling angle. Such gestures, seemingly weightless, carry messages that even the most vigilant chaperone cannot completely decipher. The story of courtship moves from outer bulwarks toward inner languages, from monitored proximity to clandestine syntax. When candle wicks are trimmed again, attentions will shift from guardianship to symbolism, from the rulebook's margins to the alphabet written on satin and petals. For now, the house rests, but the unspoken vocabulary already stirs behind closed drawers, eager for the day's first breath again. Seasonal variation further dictates the credentials of a guardian. During the London season, when terrace gossip travels faster than telegraph sparks, only the most unassailable relatives qualify. Their diaries overflow with invitations, and they must juggle obligations like theatrical cues. In quieter country months, when hedgerows isolate manors, a village rector's wife may suffice, her presence endorsed by moral authority rather than pedigree. Christmas house parties add complexity. Hostesses often delegate supervision to dowagers stationed beside the wassail bowl, ensuring no tryst forms beneath mistletoe without four authoritative eyes above. Thus, even snowfall rearranges the chessboard of propriety for courting guests. Precise measurement, though seemingly abstract, received tangible assistance. Some households kept discrete ivory rods marked at 12 inches, a precursor to modern tape measures, used by governesses to illustrate lawful spacing to daughters before an assembly. Others preferred metaphor. The width of an opened fan equals permissible gap, any closer demanding apology. In carriages, gentlemen learned that if the lady's feathered hat brushed their sleeve when wheels jolted, the gauff interior was overcrowded and required adjustment. These small calibrations relieved anxiety. Boundaries were known, visible, and thus oddly comforting, transforming social tension into a geometry problem already solved before hearts collided. Some listeners may wonder whether such vigilant mathematics of intimacy robbed tenderness of spontaneity. Diaries suggest the opposite. Constraints sharpened perception. A glance across exactly 36 inches could ignite an emotion that liberty would dilute. A crumpled calling card discovered by a chaperone might later bloom into a secret engagement, its risk-laden roots nourishing flowers more fragrant than safe arrangements. Yet all flourished beneath the same supervisory stars mapped tonight. Their soft light, neither forbidding nor permissive, simply held the scene in place long enough for feeling to ripen. Within that suspended hush lay romance's sweetest, sleepiest possibility to bloom. The final image of Chapter 3 lingers like a perfumed ghost. A ballroom emptied of sound, save for the faint tick of a mantel clock, card tables folded in the corner, the scent of wilted heliotrope drifting through half-drawn drapes. From that hush, the story reclines into quieter chambers, where feelings move as subtly as a pawn advancing one square at a time. Soft footfalls skim the corridor outside a lady's withdrawing room. Inside, two braided rugs cradle a pair of chairs positioned like opposing castles on an emotional chessboard. In one sits Miss Arabella Ingram, fan-folded, eyes bright, lip caught between two teeth. Across from her reclines Mrs. Ingram, sentinel of lineage, widow of sensible temperament, and mistress of the raised eyebrow. The tension between their stillnesses is almost audible. It hums beneath every velvet tassel. Arabella's hope, light as a white bishop, dreams of diagonally crossing the board toward a proposal. Her mother's vigilance, stalwart as a rook, blocks the lane each time the girl's imagination begins to wander. So many Victorian drawing rooms resembled this strategic field. At first glance, mother and daughter appeared allies against gossip, but within the hush-beat rival intentions. The daughter, longing to convert glances into vows. The mother, determined to filter each advance through scrutiny's sieve. To observers, all unfolded in polite smiles and measured tea. Yet beneath gloves and lace, knuckles tightened, fans snapped shut, pulses battered satin bodices with desperate semaphore. For the gentleman's suitor, the board grew more intricate still. Consider Mr. Julian Reeves, second son of a minor baronet, possessed of musical talent, moderate fortune, and a waltzing posture that made debutantes quiver. He steps into a conservatory scent thick with camellia, only to find Mrs. Ingram seated beside her daughter, parasol unfurled indoors like a pale umbrella of propriety. Reeves bows. Arabella's heart leaps 2 squares forward. Reeves's compliment circles 1 square in a polite turn. Mrs. Ingram inclines her head an inch, a move that says, "Play on, but I see every gambit." He dares an innocuous remark about the weather, then offers Arabella a sprig of lavender. The gesture seems trivial, yet in maternal calculus it hints at intimacy. Mrs. Ingram intercepts the flower, pronounces it charming, and tucks it, pointedly, into a vase high on the mantel where even Arabella must request permission to retrieve it. No single move is fatal. All, however, are observed. Behind every fluttered lash lies the possibility of scandal. Behind every withheld lavender a signal that the board remains contested terrain. From within these formal skirmishes rises the question seldom posed aloud: what of the chaperone's own nerves? Popular caricature paints the matron as stoic marble, but diaries reveal a more tremulous flesh. Diary of Mrs. Ingram, 14th April 1867. Must I truly weigh with judicial calm each smile my child expends? My head aches from vigilance. Yet should harm befall her, the world would carve blame upon my name. Oh, to be both shield and jailer, how thin the line grows. There are evenings when the maternal eye blurs, exhausted by candelabra glare. Long hours of polite monitoring breed boredom so deep it mimics melancholy. A chaperone's spine numbs against mahogany while her charge flits through quadrilles. Conversation collapses into repetitions. The weather, the latest sermon, the slow recovery of a colonel's gout. Minds wander, toward novels shelved at home, toward the absent warmth of a late husband's hand, or toward the very romance they must deny themselves in order to guard. Mrs. Lennox, a widow of scant means but impeccable ancestry, confided once to her writing desk, "Were I but 10 years younger, I would dance instead of counting dances. Last night I caught myself envying the flutter in Miss Pomeroy's cheeks when Captain Ash whispered something wicked behind his fan. I wanted to laugh with them, to share the little shock. Instead, I reminded the captain that supper awaited. Duty tastes of cold aspic." Contrary to legend, a chaperone does not always relish thwarting affection. Often she carries her own secret sympathies, fostered in the quiet hours after a ball when satin shoes are unbuttoned and candles gutter low. She may recall her girlhood letters, pressed still between prayer book pages. She may, as Mrs. Lennox did, slip a folded note, never posted, from her pocket and reread lines ink-smudged by an earlier tear. Suggesting kindness toward a suitor, however, risks gossip that vigilance has grown lax. Thus the heart folds neatly behind social armor, its softer beats reserved for silent rooms. Yet not all suitors face equal surveillance. Class, that invisible border, redraws the board itself. For daughters of the landed gentry, courtship resembles a tournament, spectators arrayed along gilt balconies. Each move is chronicled in neighborly whisper: his lineage, his rents, her dowry, her aunt's opinion of his waistcoat. One misstep could consign a girl to a lifetime of spinsterhood, one reckless elopement to ostracism more chilling than poverty. Where assets are entwined with honor, maternal vigilance grows hawk sharp. Among the lesser gentry and mercantile classes, rules flex slightly. Here, fortunes swell and deflate on tides of trade. A mother may calculate in spreadsheets of hope. If Mr. Carter secures that railway contract, his offer eclipses Mr. Browning's comfortable stationery shop. Vigilance persists, yet boredom often yields to anxious arithmetic. The chaperone in such circles is less warden than hedge fund manager of reputation, speculating on love's market futures. Further down the ladder, in artisan parlors where pianoforte lessons are luxuries, the chessboard shrinks to a checker square. Courting couples walk out under gas lamps with only a younger sibling in tow. Maternal eyes still follow, but windows rattle thin between alley gusts. The luxury of constant escort fades before factory dawn bells. Here, emotions bruise quickly and heal as best they may. Class compresses the margin for romantic error, yet also grants a precious looseness, a chance to speak plain where upper tiers must cipher everything through etiquette's code. Even within one household, hierarchies ripple. Waiting in the passage while Arabella glides through her mother's orchestrations stands Lucy, the lady's maid, her own heart tuned to a different key. Lucy knows Mrs. Ingram's subtler signals, the flicked glance that recalls her to replenish tea, the sigh that dismisses an over-eager gentleman. She studies the board from the wings, gleaning strategies perhaps useful to her own small dramas, an underfootman's grin, a shared candle when trimming wicks, the perilous joy of a stolen midnight cider in the pantry. Lucy's game is faster, lower stakes legally, higher stakes emotionally. For should her reputation fray, no lavender sprig will ever be returned to its vase in polite forgiveness. Back upstairs, the suitor paces. Mr. Reeves rehearses lines in the library's dim corner, compliments on Arabella's sketchbook, admiration for her Italian, a discreet mention of his aunt's estate near Oxford that might assure Mrs. Ingram of respectable connections. Every phrase must land between ardor and restraint. Too much fervor invites gossip, too little, indifference. The young man whose courage managed cavalry drills at Sandhurst now quivers before a pair of lorgnettes. His own diary, discovered years later in an attic trunk, discloses, 24th of June. I thought to speak with certainty tonight, yet her mother's gaze froze the syllables in my throat. One cannot woo a statue's daughter under Medusa's eye. Still, Arabella smiled when I retrieved her dropped glove. If gloves may speak, hers said persist. The very objects of the drawing room become emotional tokens. A discarded fan may signal momentary exasperation. A deliberately misplaced shawl invites retrieval. Chaperones read these semaphores alongside potential suitors, sometimes more fluently. When Mrs. Ingram spies her daughter's lace mouchoir left upon a settee where Julian Reeves has just rested, she sweeps in, folds the cloth, and returns it with a murmured reproof. The board resets. One small skirmish ends, but each thwarting exacts a toll. After guests depart, Mrs. Ingram sits before her dressing table, undoing pearl pins with fingers that tremble a fraction. No audience remains to applaud her vigilance. Her reflection, silvered in candlelight, resembles both victor and casualty. She has guarded Arabella's virtue through another evening. She has also, perhaps, blocked a happiness that might have ripened safely under gentler watch. Her diary that night: if only judgment were as simple as bloom or blight. Instead, I prune vigorously, fearing rot, and worry later that I have cut away sweetness. Among chaperones, camaraderie grows in whispered corners. During a long musicale, two matrons exchange wry glances over an overwrought soprano. Between arias, Mrs. Lennox leans toward Mrs. Ingram. My older girl married last season. I thought the relief would be instantaneous. Instead, I missed the riddle. We watch these children as though they were fledglings. Suddenly, the nest empties and the world seems terribly still. In such confessions lies the buried admission that guarding another's heart can distract from the loneliness of guarding one's own. Some matrons scribble poetry after midnight, lines never spoken aloud. Others press violets from dances long forgotten. The psychological ledger balances duty against a private yearning that no etiquette manual dares address. Meanwhile, the daughters lie awake beneath canopies, turning possibilities like charms. Arabella pictures Mr. Reeves adjusting his cravat. She whispers his name into the cushion, half terrified the curtains will carry the sound to her mother's chamber. Romance under surveillance acquires an intoxicating taste. Longing, sharpened by prohibition, glitters sharper than any diamond. In dreams, the chessboard vanishes. She sees instead a meadow without hedgerows, Mr. Reeves striding toward her, no chaperone in sight. They speak not in coded phrases, but in earnest. Yet even within sleep, propriety intrudes. The specter of her mother materializes at a distance, parasol aloft, eyes aflame with silent reproach. Arabella wakes just before the embrace. Below stairs, Lucy dozes lightly too, carrying a simpler dream, a picnic with the underfootman at Richmond. Shoes off, toes dipped in the Thames, no regards to station. She will wake before dawn to heat water for Arabella's toilette, smoothing a future for the young lady, even as her own remains rumpled. By sunrise, pieces rearray on the board. Breakfast trays clink, letters arrive. Among them, a cream-colored envelope sealed with Mr. Reeves's crest. It addresses Mrs. Ingram formally, yet conveys gratitude for the honor of last evening and humbly requests permission to escort mother and daughter to the horticultural exhibition next week. The move is bold, yet impeccably chaperoned. Mrs. Ingram considers, taps the envelope twice, and sets it beside the marmalade. Arabella busies herself buttering toast while her pulse gallops. Events accrue, each polite, each strategic. The exhibition will teem with orchids and roses, allowing conversation about botany instead of ardor. Yet there will be shaded alcoves, faint hushes, the possibility of a low-voiced compliment amid the rustling of palm fronds. Mrs. Ingram will walk 2 paces behind, feigning attention to rare ferns, ears tuned to every syllable. The game continues. Across town in a narrower street, Miss Edith Clark, daughter of a master tailor, receives no invitation to exhibitions. Courtship for her unfolds on Sunday walks. Her mother enables these outings with a small cousin as escort, trusting that decency and daylight suffice. Edith envies Arabella's gowns, but not her shackles. Class reshapes emotion by altering both strategy and risk. The higher the stake, the stricter the rule. The lower the rule, the swifter the heart may bruise. Thus, sentiment migrates along social gradients. Among the aristocracy, yearning cloaks itself in understatement. Among clerks and shopkeepers, it declares itself more plainly, yet suffers brisker consequences should things sour. Among servants, love hides behind broom cupboards, surging fiercely because tomorrow offers little promise of luxury. When dusk falls again and candles are trimmed for yet another assembly, the house exhales a collective sigh, as though acknowledging an infinite waltz. Mothers, daughters, suitors, and silent watchers gather their pieces, ready for the next advance. In some corner of London, an etiquette manual goes to print, listing correct distances for promenades, approved chaperone responses to an unexpected shower, proper angles of a parasol tilt. Its author could never suspect the subterranean rivers of longing that pulse beneath every prescription, or how each rule bends differently beneath the weight of coins in a family's purse. Night deepens. Mrs. Ingram writes one final diary line before snuffing her candle. Love fenced too tightly withers. Love left wild invites storms. May I sight the temperate path. Her pen rests. The faint shuffle of cards in a distant parlor hints at the theme waiting in the wings. Coded gestures, subtle signals, the private languages by which lovers tiptoe past watchful eyes. That hushed grammar, and the objects through which it spoke, will soon claim the lantern light. The music that drifted out of last chapter's glass-roofed conservatory still lingers in the ears, a faint violin phrase suspended like dew upon a spider's web at dawn. Having watched the final couple step away beneath the watchful eye of their rosy-cheeked aunt, we now follow the hush that settles afterward, as the candles sputter, as slippers whisper across marble, and as the great house exhales the day. It is a hush that belongs equally to baronial turrets, rented terraces on the outskirts of Birmingham, and canvas verandas in Calcutta. Tonight, we let that hush carry us through corridors and carriageways, upstairs and downstairs, through soot-dusted alleys and across the hemispheres, to discover how the same etiquette we traced in ballroom glow takes root in very different soils. Begin with upstairs, where the ancestral portraits brood from walnut paneling, and where hospitality unfolds with the languid certainty of money that has never considered its own edges. At a country house weekend, the chaperone's chore is cushioned by space. Sleeping wings separate maiden from suitor by a creak of corridors. Breakfast is staggered, and the billiard room provides a buffer long enough for gossip to stale before it bites. The lady of the manor glides rather than busies, delegating vigilance to nephews, to governesses, even to accommodating dogs, for scandal here is imagined to echo across centuries. The house party itself is an engine designed to disguise supervision as leisure. A boating expedition on the ornamental lake appears spontaneous, yet the seating of a young widow between two old colonels is calculated with the same arithmetic used to arrange the dinner place cards. Etiquette operates in murmured asides. Lady Agatha, do take Mr. Popham on your right. His rheumatism will keep the skiff from drifting too far. Under such pretexts, distance, not nearness, becomes romance's crucible. Downstairs, the sculleries thunder, yet even below, the hierarchy of watchfulness persists. A kitchen maid entrusted with carrying lemonade to the croquet lawn understands that her eyes serve two households, the one on the payroll and the one of her own people. She may warn a footman if a fling with the governess appears detectable. Thus the chaperone idea filters down as communal self-protection. The butler hears everything, states nothing, yet takes quiet, corrective measures, swapping labels on decanters so that the young lord's scheme for overgenerous port does not cloud the after-dinner stroll. Shift now to urban parlors, narrow, high-ceilinged, papered in imitation damask whose joins betray a landlord's haste. Middle-class striving compresses bodies and reputations alike. Where a country house disperses temptation, a suburban sitting room concentrates it. A chaise longue that might seat 3 squeezes 5 during a music hall. The piano's lid cannot be raised without brushing the fichu of the girl at its side. Here the chaperone is an active instrument, not a symbolic presence. A mother counts the measures of Chopin to predict how long her daughter's gloved hand will rest near the tenor's shoulder while he turns pages. She monitors draughts, mantles, the height of a lamp wick, subtle levers to break intimacy before it hardens into talk. She is anxious because her family's respectability is new, earned in iron foundries, insurance ledgers, or colonial brokerage. One misstep can unravel the painstaking climb into polite recognition. Whereas the grand seigneurs sprinkle gossip like confetti, the parvenus fear each whisper might become a mortgage default. This anxiety is acute, chronic, and curiously creative. It births rulebooks, literally. Publishers flood stationers' shelves with manuals such as Beaton's, The Manners of the Drawing Room, and discreet pamphlets titled simply On Visiting. Households clip, annotate, and pass these pages like scripture. When ceilings crack from factory soot, etiquette offers plaster. The rigidity of calling cards, the policing of curfews, and the ceremonial unveiling of the gasolier at exactly 7:45. Even the placement of fern fronds in the Apergon becomes an ethical semaphore. Further afield, away from clanging railways and away from manor bells, lie the rural settlements. Villages strung along hedgerows, slate cottages hugging moor or fen, hamlets where the church spire rises above grazing commons. In these pockets, formal chaperonage relaxes into communal knowledge. Everybody watches because every face is known. A widow selling eggs sees the curate flirting by the lyche gate. She mentions it to the vicar's wife while buying ribbons. By evensong, the situation resolves itself via a timely invitation to tea. Distance is traveled on foot, so elopements are impractical. A runaway couple may be discovered panting beside a stile by the next milk cart. Thus, rural guardianship is diffuse. It lives in weather forecasts, in the ring of a smithy's anvil, in the owed favor of a hay baler. Custom substitutes for code. And still further outward, across steamship routes ribboning the empire, we encounter the colonial outposts. Calcutta with its mango-scented evenings, Cape Town with its Table Mountain wind, Kingston, Auckland, Singapore, each inherits British etiquette but must negotiate temperature, topography, and local custom. Picture the Calcutta Club garden after sunset, Punka's creak, Punkawalla's drowse, and a young civil servant hopes to escort Miss Wilcox along a moon-washed path. Yet the Memsahibs, veterans of cholera seasons, insist on early curfews. Moreover, a detachment of ayahs, orderly and unspoken, stands as additional chaperones. The colonial household is at once porous and armored. Verandas are open to monsoon rain, but verandas are also observation decks. In Cape Town, meanwhile, Dutch hospitality mingles with English propriety. A visiting naval officer may attend a picnic on the Kirstenbosch slopes, where ostrich plumes share blanket space with cucumber sandwiches, and where the chaperone's parasol casts both shade and social perimeter. Local customs of handshaking, eye contact, and the Afrikaans coffee drink complicate British rules in a manner both awkward and exhilarating. Across these geographies, three metrics silently govern every decision: cost, mobility, reputation risk. They fluctuate like mercury in barometers, but always they are read with care. To illuminate their behavior, let us lay them side by side in a drowsy candlelit table. Comparative table. The tremor of lace against ledgers, columns, setting cost of observance, guineas per season, mobility, granted to courtship pair, reputation risk if breach occurs. Aristocratic house party, high but diffused, staff absorbed, gamekeepers dispatched, floral budgets hidden in estate accounts. Moderate, lakes, libraries, and garden follies permit strolling, yet are buffered by acreage. Surprisingly low, lineage offers partial insulation. Whispers rarely dislodge surnames carved into pew ends. Urban middle-class parlor, moderate but conspicuous. Lamp oil, sheet music, and confectionaries hit ledgers directly. Restricted, every doorway leads to someone's earshot. Cabs are dear. Extremely high. Fortunes made in 20 years may be lost in 2 rumors. Rural hamlet, low, infused into harvest fates and parish teas. Gifts in kind replace invoices. Variable, footpaths are public, but weekly markets gather all eyes. Medium, misconduct travels fast yet is often forgiven after bans are called. Colonial Station, Calcutta, Cape Town. High and elastic, import duties on lace, ice, pianofortes, hazard pay for comfort. Broad within compounds, horses, rickshaws, mountain trails. Limited outside due to climate and racial boundaries. High and unpredictable, European scrutiny cohabits with local gossip. Scandal may reach London packet before monsoon ends. As you let the rows drift together, you may find your eyelids tracing the quiet arithmetic behind them. Money as cushion, distance as disguise, reputation as both feather and flint. Where the sums are generous, supervision can masquerade as indulgence. Where the sums are slender, vigilance sharpens like the needle in a governess's darning kit. And where the sums are caught between currencies and continents, supervision invents hybrid forms: the ayah at the lace curtain, the Malay nanny holding a lantern at garden's edge, the Zulu nanny humming a lullaby that doubles as a curfew bell. Yet across all settings, the emotional weather remains oddly constant. Hopefulness flickers, caution follows, and somewhere a chaperone's heartbeat drums a quiet tattoo of responsibility. A silk train may sweep a marble floor in Wiltshire exactly as a cotton sari flutters along the Hooghly embankment. Both movements invite notice. Both depend on someone standing to the side, counting seconds, measuring shadows, and deciding, without apparent effort, when the threshold of decorum approaches. Let us wander then a little longer in each scene, the better to savor their hush. Imagine the manor's morning room just before dawn. The visiting rector's daughter tiptoes toward a French window, drawn by the scent of wisteria and the possibility of seeing Mr. Hesketh return from an early ride. At the threshold, she hesitates, remembering Lady Camberwell's instruction that unaccompanied garden walks begin only after breakfast. The girl retreats, but not before the scullery maid glimpses her pale gown against the glass. No words spoken. Still, a gentle message travels via the servants' corridor, so that by the time the rector's daughter joins the dining table, Mr. Hesketh is seated opposite, safe, approved, and oblivious to the tremor he caused. Now slip into a Birmingham terrace on a sooty November evening. The drawing-room curtains are pulled tight against fog. Mr. Bristow, clerk of accounts, sets sheet music before the eldest daughter, Miss Clara, who adjusts her gloves to play. Her mother arranges a davenport as buffer between the two. A gas jet pops, shadows somersault. In that quiver, Clara's little sister knocks over a vase. Accident or strategy? Either way, the crash resets everyone's posture. Tea is served. Respectability resumes, fragile as the mended porcelain that will be turned discreetly to the wall. Cross the meadows to a Devon village hall, glowing with lanterns strung for a harvest dance. Here, etiquette is performed in clusters of cousins, godparents, and farmhands. A fiddle leaps, boots stamp. The schoolmistress beams at her fiancé, allowed a polka but no waltz until banns are read. Supervisors are multiple and merry. The midwife, the gamekeeper, even the publican, each taking a turn about the edge of the room, ensuring no one slips outdoors where the hedges are high and the moon is obliging. Finally, voyage to a Calcutta veranda where punkah fans stroke the humid air. A memsahib hosting a soiree instructs her bearer to place citronella candles in a ring, not merely to foil mosquitoes, but also to demarcate how far Lieutenant Pemberton may wander with Miss Wilcox after cards. Nearby, Bengali musicians strum sitars between quadrille sets, syncopating social distance. On the far side of Empire, in Cape Town, a similar circle is drawn in the dust by a borrowed parasol. The languages vary, yet the geometry of guardianship remains familiar. Figure eights of caution surrounding a single quivering point of flirtation. If you find yourself drowsing as these scenes layer one upon another, that is fitting. Etiquette itself, when working, is a lullaby, quietly engineering peace so that young hearts may beat loudly inside it. Close your eyes, and you might still smell the beeswax of manor floors, the coal smoke of city rows, the hay-laden air of country lanes, the salt and spice breezes of distant harbors. Each scent carries footsteps receding down corridors patrolled by vigilant companions. Soon we will drift into the mechanisms behind those companions. The legal scaffolding of consent, the parliamentary debates that tried, and sometimes failed, to codify virtue. But for the moment, remain within this hush, where differences of class, geography, and empire lengthen or compress the same essential tether. Listen to the faint footsteps of a chaperone shifting her weight on polished boards, the click of snuffers extinguishing a candelabra, the sigh of a young man returning a borrowed novel to the library shelf. Etiquette, like the lamplight, narrows to a single thread before the darkness takes over. And in that narrowing, our path to the next chapter lies outlined, dimly, patiently, ready to reveal the legal statutes that tried to translate these whispers into writ. For now, let the last ember settle. Let night blanket all settings, from Wiltshire to the Cape, from Manchester's canals to the Ganges Delta. The hush holds them equal, and sleep, as ever, is the most democratic chaperone of all. In the afterglow of our previous hour, the candle we left flickering in the rose-scented drawing room has guttered down to a quiet ember, yet its perfume still hangs in the drapery. Around that ember, the vigilant silhouettes of mothers, maiden aunts, and eagle-eyed companions continue their nocturnal vigil, intent on shielding youthful hearts from even the faintest brush of impropriety. Tonight, we settle deeper into the brocade cushions, pull the counterpane of twilight up to our chins, and listen for the secret rustle beneath the surface etiquette, the subdued choreography of affection that slipped ever so gently through Victorian fingers. First, the hush of code. A single verb traded in conversation, blossom perhaps, could bloom into a clandestine meeting place, while an innocent remark about weather might signal the hour. Suitors and sweethearts dissected the dictionary until it yielded private constellations of meaning, each star bright enough for two and invisible to the rest of the sky. In parlors thick with well-bred small talk, one carefully pronounced consonant acted as a lighthouse, guiding a lover's thoughts across a sea of listeners who heard nothing but polite rain. Dictionaries, letter games, even sermons were mined for syllables that could be pocketed like contraband sugar and passed without a blush from hand to gloved hand. Yet language alone could not always ferry emotion across a crowded salon, so fabric became an accomplice. The dropped handkerchief, immortalized by novelists and caricaturists alike, functioned as a tactile telegram. A lawn square embroidered with cornflowers signaled a morning ride. A monogram nested in forget-me-nots suggested moonlight. Etiquette books warned that a lady must never retrieve her own kerchief. Thus, bending for it offered a gentleman an excuse to lean down too, shoulders momentarily touching in the sanctioned scramble. Observers saw an accident. Conspirators felt a jolt of recognition more electric than any lamp along the Strand. When private codes and silk squares risked exposure, lovers enlarged the stage. Group excursions, picnic parties, botanical walks, charity fetes provided acres of conversation in which two words might be whispered unnoticed. A chaperone stationed at the head of a winding woodland path could not easily police its fern-sheltered forks. In the polyphony of a coach ride to seaside air, one fleeting press of knees could be disguised amid the wagon's friendly jolts. By ensuring the guest list was irreproachably mixed, 3 cousins, 1 rector, a widowed neighbor, young hearts erected a palisade of respectability behind which they could steal their minute. Planning such outings required logistical finesse. Invitations were timed so that a crucial seat remained unclaimed until, oh marvel, the very gentleman a lady wished to study happened to be available. Lemonade hampers were arranged so that a pair volunteering to fetch more cups could vanish into orchard shade. Even children served the scheme. Siblings were plied with sweets to play lookout, their delighted shrieks camouflaging murmured endearments over the clink of glasses. Still, every game demands an umpire, and in this tableau the role fell to what contemporary gossip columns dubbed the flexible chaperone. She was often a cash-strapped relative or a governess of maturing years willing to trade vigilance for remuneration, whether coin, gowns, or the vague promise of future patronage. By day, she performed the expected routines, needlework, gentle admonitions, the occasional throat-clearing cough. By dusk, her eyesight grew courteous gaps, her hearing lost certain frequencies, and her route around ornamental ponds developed decorative detours. Society pretended not to notice. Indeed, it found a certain comfort in the implication that youthful ardor could be regulated by discreetly adjustable authority. Negotiations with such guardians were conducted under layers of ostensible concern. Aunt Lavinia tires easily. Shall we position her chair nearer the hydrangeas? Translation: keep her where lamplight fails to reach. Miss Price deserves an extra shawl. Translation: we've secured her agreement. Reward the alliance. These fragile treaties required daily renewal, for money could change hands, but reputations changed more capriciously. One unguarded smile spotted by a rival matron and an indulgent chaperone might overnight adopt the severity of a fortress keep. Where a person might falter, technology offered steelier silence. The penny post, introduced midway through the century, democratized distance. For a single, coppery coin, a note could dash from Bloomsbury to Bath, bearing nothing more scandalous on its envelope than an inked flourish. Couples developed complex chains, letters sent to a modist, collected by a milliner's errand boy, then forwarded within hat boxes to a country cousin. Inside were pressed violets, sketches of a future cottage, or directions to the gate that squeaked only after the third push. Speed soon bred audacity. Private telegraph wires, leased by affluent families to coordinate estates, became midnight conduits for emotion. Messages had to remain ruthlessly brief. Each word cost, and the line might be shared with clerks or gardeners, so new shorthand bloomed. 3 crowns 7 meant, depending on the pair, meet under 3 crowns of elm at 7. Certain couples even practiced mimicking the operator's clipped cadences, so that if an inquisitive uncle intercepted the click-clack, he would assume it mere bookkeeping. Against such ingenuity, centuries of propriety occasionally lost the skirmish. Consider the 1848 flight of Lady Maria Lennox, who converted a cousin's charity bazaar into a stage for departure. While her aunt enumerated trinkets for sale, Maria slipped into the tent where raffle baskets were stored, exchanged her lace day dress for a plain riding habit, and mounted a waiting phaeton driven by her fiancé, Mr. Shaw. Their route wove through public turnpikes where anonymity thrived. By sunrise, they were in Gretna Green, vows sealed upon an anvil still warm from the previous couple's plunge. Or recall the formidable Miss Georgiana Talbot, heiress to a shipping fortune, who befriended her father's telegraph installer. Over weeks, she persuaded him to teach her the code. One frozen January night, she dispatched a single pulse to Captain Elwood: sail. By dawn, Georgiana had boarded a coastal packet. Society awakened too late, left to debate whether wires ought ever to enter a young lady's sphere. These escapades unsettled drawing rooms, yet they also dented the iron facade of Victorian courtship rules. Gossip traveled as quickly as telegrams, and every runaway match recalibrated what guardians considered permissible. A chaperone formerly strict to the point of martyrdom might, after witnessing the Talbot scandal, adopt a subtle leniency in hopes of averting a darker flight. Thus, misbehavior paradoxically nourished reform. Each loophole, once revealed, compelled the loophole's keeper to widen the gate or risk having it kicked in altogether. Still, even the most daring hearts rarely sought outright rebellion. They wished for blessing, for the slow unfolding of love beneath familiar rafters. So the average couple moved like underground rivers, quiet, persistent, surfacing only when daylight proved safe. They traded chess moves rather than pistol shots, preferring strategy to uproar. One hidden note in a prayer book, one beleaguered chaperone nodding off, one group archery lesson that allowed the loan of a bowstring bracelet. These small, hushed victories accumulated until, by the time an engagement was formally announced, it merely ratified a bond already tempered in secrecy. As our minds drift towards slumber, we might picture the Victorian garden at twilight, gravel paths looping in arabesques, each bend a possible tryst, lamp-lighted verandas where gloves brush against railings still warm from afternoon sun. In the distance, a faint telegram tapping like a mechanical heartbeat. The guardians pace their prescribed circuits, unaware, or perhaps perfectly aware, that somewhere amongst the lilacs two hands have found each other briefly, deftly, wisely concealed. Let the ember we carried from the previous chapter cool at last to a single red pinpoint. In its glow, we recognize that every rule invites ingenuity, every barrier sharpens desire, and every love story, even the most docile on its surface, possesses a chapter written in invisible ink. In our next gentle session, we shall open the velvet-bound ledger of ballroom protocol, tracing how the formal waltz floor offered spectacle, sanction, and still more subtle latitude for hearts that dared to improvise beneath a chandelier's approving glitter. As the paper lanterns of the seaside promenade, those waning lights that closed the last chapter, dim into the pearl-colored hush of dawn, an imagined parlor drifts into view. Cushions remember the warmth of vanished guests, and an embroidery hoop lies where it was set aside, needle paused mid-stitch, like a breath held between sentences. Into this tranquil room glide the silhouettes of literary chaperones, guardians of propriety, wardens of romance, each carrying the faint fragrance of the century that fashioned her. First steps Lady Russell from Jane Austen's Persuasion, composed yet restless, a widow who substitutes vigilance for the companionship she forfeited. Her reasoning is all pastel watercolors and measured teacups, safety, status, suitably arranged alliances. Love for her is a puzzle best solved in honest daylight. Moonlight only blurs the edges. Thus she folds Anne's yearning into tidy counsel, unaware of how tightly the creases press. Close behind, though from a darker doorway, appears Bronte's Mrs. Fairfax. Thornfield has tutored her in the art of listening for draughts beneath doors. Less ambitious than Lady Russell, she does not design futures. She merely tries to keep the present from toppling the candelabra. Where Russell plots, Fairfax patches. Where one orchestrates, the other tidies. Both, however, circle the same hearth of duty, stirred by differing embers of fear. Outside fiction, real voices murmur corroboration. In brittle ink, an aunt in Bath warns her niece that the colonel's laugh is altogether too ready, and that a stroll unescorted may turn gossip into gospel. A brother stationed in Calcutta encloses earnest counsel with a bank draft, urging his sister not to refuse a reverend's proposal merely because affection drowses elsewhere. Affection, he reminds her, can be trained to the trellis provided. Their tones vary, fond, coaxing, occasionally imperious, but each line knots family into the laces of courtship, tightening or loosening according to the tremor in the guardian hand. Such diligence naturally invited satire. Punch magazine, ever attentive to Victorian pomposity, sketched meddling matrons with beaks sharper than umbrellas. One panel shows a suitor attempting conversation while a chaperone 4 inches away brandishes an ear trumpet to assist his candor. Another crowns an aunt with opera glasses so enormous they eclipse the couple entirely, captioned, "Love's Eclipse" or "Safety First." The jokes clink like spoons against china, mockery politely served, yet piercing. The Stage and the Penny Weekly soon amplified the amusement. West End comedies timed a dowager's entrance to the clash of a cymbal, scattering lovers like swallows before a storm, while serialized romances dangled her silhouette across installments, a living semicolon delaying each embrace until next month's issue. Curtain and colophon thus extended the drawing room, reinforcing vigilance through laughter and suspense. Was etiquette imitating art, or art merely holding a mirror? Perhaps the two exchanged glances across decades, shy at first, then conspiratorial. Families cited novels to justify caution. Playwrights thumbed deportment manuals for comic precision. In the slow osmosis between page and parlor, each side nourished the other, until origins blurred like reflections on polished walnut. Beneath the scholarly diagrams beats a quieter heart, the cost of guarding. Letters scribbled in hymn book margins show chaperones who drift into reverie only during organ interludes, then snap the thought shut like a music stand. One anonymous fragment, folded into a psalter, confides, "If the girl marries well, I may revisit my own old letters. Until then, they must remain enclosed." The ink has bled, as though time itself exhaled upon the page. Photography captured the pose. In early carte de visite portraits, a debutante gleams in the foreground, while an older cousin hovers behind, hand resting on chair back like a silent parenthesis. Even in stillness, the idea of supervision clings to posture and shadow. When silent cinema arrived, the trope crossed frames unchanged. Matrons fanned themselves across the screen, lace veils fluttering like semaphore flags of censure. Audiences needed only a glance. Romance must thread the needle with caution. Why, then, do Lady Russell and Mrs. Fairfax, inked scarcely 3 decades apart, feel worlds distant? Context supplies part of the answer. Austen writes from the early Regency, when social arithmetic still ruled alliances, and her guardian therefore guards sums, fortunes, pedigrees, drawing-room equations. Bronte composes after industrial smoke has begun to stain the horizon. Her danger is psycho-Gothic. Mrs. Fairfax serves not the balance sheet but the locked attic, fearing what the house itself might mutter behind paneled walls. Thus the same archetype flexes to mirror dominant anxieties: economics in 1818, identity in 1847. Tone draws the remaining line. Lady Russell speaks in measured counsel, a living conduct manual. Her phrases suit the carpeted hush of Bath parlors. Mrs. Fairfax begins sentences with a fluttering "well now" or "I dare say," words that beat like moth wings against candle flame. Through diction alone, each woman discloses the nature of her guardianship, systematic or instinctual. In lived society, both styles coexisted. Mrs. Beeton proposed rational schedules: walks at 11, calls at 3, curtains drawn at dusk, while oral tradition added instinct. If the garden hush feels too velvety, fetch another companion. Etiquette thus occupied both page and bloodstream, planned yet felt, taught yet inherited. Victorian periodicals even printed diagrams of permissible distance: 12 inches between gloves in a quadrille, no more than 2 feet on a settee unless an aunt is present. Geometry offered the heart something solid to pound against. Defiance needs boundaries to experience the thrill of trespass. Beyond Britain, the custom bent to local skies. Highland memoirs speak of walking watchers who pretended to gather heather while trailing courting pairs at the length of a plaid shawl, and colonial letters from Rangoon describe veranda meetings supervised by punkawallas whose rhythmic fans cooled both air and morals. Landscape, climate, empire, each adjusted the choreography without altering the melody. Across all variations hovers one truth: unchecked love might unravel threads laboriously woven by lineage, property, and allegiance. Guardianship stitched bias tape around the raw edge of feeling. Sometimes the binding held, sometimes passion frayed straight through, leaving scandal to flutter in newspapers that the same guardians professed never to read. More than a century later, the trope persists. Costume dramas assign chaperones the role of comic relief, yet designers still research needle-lace cuffs. Novelists retell persuasion from Lady Russell's perspective, unearthing remorse beneath her polished composure. Resonance endures because the contradiction endures. Society demands order, yet worships the spark that disorder sets alight. Love craves witness, yet resents supervision. In this drowsy hour, the parlor feels wrapped in eider-down questions. Did etiquette script art, or did art rehearse etiquette until society learned its lines? Perhaps the distinction matters only to archivists. Between the turning pages, story and custom lie side by side like mirrors facing mirrors, reflecting until beginnings and endings dissolve into an endless corridor of parasols and furtive glances. A coal settles in the grate, releasing a faint sigh. Within that sigh lingers the next meditation: the dance itself, where chalked geometry becomes living motion and chaperones pivot at the perimeter like clock hands keeping time. The lanterns of the promenade may have guttered, yet their memory will glimmer upon polished floorboards soon enough. The glass-roofed conservatory, its ferns still glistening from a perfumed midnight mist, recedes behind the mind's eye, leaving only the hush of slow-drifting petals. Into that hush arrives a faint rustle of parchment, passenger manifests, coded telegrams, and folded calling cards, each marking the departure of Victorian courtship rules on a journey both westward and empire-wide. A lantern glow settles over a steam-crossed Atlantic, and first among the travelers comes the grand aunt of Iberian origin, the duenna. In the drawing rooms of Boston and New York, her Spanish vowels soften, reshaped by New England reserve. The term, whispered with a hint of Old World spice, coexists uneasily with the homegrown matron, whose Anglo-Saxon consonants speak of pilgrim duties and Mayflower lineage. Where the duenna retains a vigilant, almost theatrical severity, the matron prefers a porch swing's quiet surveillance. Embroidery in hand, gaze lifted whenever footsteps linger too long beside the hydrangeas. Within the walnut-paneled townhouses of Fifth Avenue, a careful choreography unfolds. A matron's authority is granted by civic standing, philanthropic board seats, and the respectable nearness of her own silver-templed husband. A duenna's influence, by contrast, is exoticized. Her dark shawl and cameo brooch imply continental intrigue. Yet both women, beneath differing veneers, wield identical powers. The light clearing of a throat to end a whispered tete-a-tete, the subtle redirection of a meandering promenade, the calm insertion of a less combustible waltz partner. Onward, the narration drifts north and west to the stone-ribbed streets of Dublin, Edinburgh, and Cardiff, where Celtic breezes thread regional filaments into the chaperone tapestry. In Ireland, the figure of the minding aunt carries hints of storytelling hearths. She restrains impropriety with fables rather than regulations. Tales of wild giessa and tragic lovers serve as cautionary lanterns more than printed manuals ever could. A gathering at the rotunda, golden harp strings echoing, reveals her gentle steering, an elbow light against a niece's kid-gloved arm, guiding her away from officers rumored too fond of both cards and claret. Across the sea in Scotland, heather-scented pragmatism prevails. The Scottish chaperone, often a stern kirk elder's wife, keeps courtship aligned with Presbyterian sobriety. Her weapon of choice is the scrutiny of clan memory, the reminder that any lapse will be recounted at every hogmanay hence. She permits outdoor walks, important in bracing Highland air, but numbers the paces between courting pair and chaperone with mathematical precision. To exceed that measure is to invite a cough resonant as a cathedral bell. In Wales, beneath slate skies and the lull of chapel hymns, the chaperone acquires a musical patience. Many gatherings revolve around Eisteddfod Fodow, where poetry readings stretch long into lamplit nights. A chaperone there practices the art of listening for unspoken couplings woven through stanzas. Should a bard's metaphors flirt too openly, she settles the matter with a quiet adjustment of the seating chart, placing a cousin and two spinster friends between poet and muse. Harmony, vocal and moral, is thereby restored. Across imperial meridians, the scene shifts again, warmed now by the cinnamon breath of the subcontinent. In British India, the zenana, the secluded women's quarter, presents a paradox to London's imported code. Anglo-Indian households adapt through composite supervision. An English governess, versed in deportment manuals, collaborates with a senior ayah who knows the intricate rhythms of purdah. Where corseted etiquette insists on ballroom exposure, the zenana offers latticed screens, conversations murmured through sandalwood doors, and veiled glances heavy with consequence. Here, chaperonage becomes a duet, one guardian translating colonial expectations, the other safeguarding indigenous dignity. Hybrid models emerge. During winter season in Simla, hill station picnics require dual clearance. The ayah's nod that a young memsahib's chiffon remains opaque against mountain sun, and the governess's approval that an ensign's compliments remain within the boundaries of decent levity. Evening returns to the plains dissolve roles further. At a midnight notch, the ayah maintains respectful distance just beyond lamplight, while the governess counts each dance in her diary, assuring London relatives that gaiety never outran discretion. The narrative drifts southward, following missionary schooners to palm-ringed archipelagos and African savannas where cicadas pulse like distant metronomes. In these outposts, chaperonage must bow to sparse populations and multitasking households. A missionary wife may serve simultaneously as healer, linguist, and guardian of courtship. Her supervisory gaze is less ceremonious, more pragmatic. The clinic's medicine cupboard becomes a vantage point from which whispering youths beside the water barrel can be gently dispersed with an errand for quinine. Yet even amid bamboo chapel walls or mud brick schoolrooms, ritual persists. A visiting suitor recites scripture aloud in the common room, a substitute for the drawing room piano piece. Lanterns are doused by 9, though moonlight glows silver upon the river. Expedition journals describe hushed riverbank walks, always triangulated by a third figure, perhaps a young catechist or a traveling aunt, whose presence, though unarmed, stands sentinel against overbold declarations. Threading through these vignettes, an imagined map unfurls like parchment across a mahogany table. Coastlines illuminate in sepia, and delicate blue arrows trace the migration of rules. An arrow leaves London's Portland Place, curves to New York, splits toward New Orleans plantations and Chicago lakefront promenades. Another veers toward Calcutta, branching in copper filigree across princely states where local customs splice into imported sternness. Dotted lines sweep to Lagos, Samoa, Suva. Wherever they land, little icons bloom, parasols, prayer books, or jasmine-braided fans, each signifying how etiquette roots itself in different soils. A quiet pulse rhythms beneath the cartographic panorama, mirroring steam-age progress. Railways shorten chaperoned carriage rides. Telegraphs compress the time between proposal and acceptance. The map shades darker where industrial cities roar, lighter where plantation verandas await dusk. Yet in every locale the guardian's silhouette lingers, an elder seated just off-center, eyes neither intrusive nor absent, maintaining a gracious tension between allowance and interdiction. As the map rolls itself into a scroll, the lantern's glow settles once more upon the Atlantic. Floating there, 2 terms hover like companion moons, duenna and matron. Their etymologies whisper histories of conquest, settlement, aspiration. Spanish dignity intertwines with Puritan prudence, shaping a uniquely American hybrid by 1890. In Newport, a duenna's stern fan snaps shut during a cotillion, only to open again in a flutter of patriotic stripes, an imported gesture revised for a 4th of July fete. Meanwhile, in a St. Louis conservatory, a matron exchanges recipe notes with a Cuban relative, adopting saffron and almond alongside etiquette's own borrowed spices. Small scenes flicker. An Irish aunt in San Francisco, quoting Banshee folklore to spice up the duller cautions found in Mrs. Sherwood's handbook, a Scottish companion on a Montana ranch whose horse riding oversight melds side-saddle decorum with frontier grit, a Welsh tutor in Auckland, tracking infatuations through the hymns chosen for evening devotions. Across the empire and the pond, the rulebook flexes like willow in wind, yet rarely snaps. Back within the imagined conservatory, those first fallen petals have grown faintly luminous, phosphorescent under closing hour lamps. They recall the universal motive shared by duenna, matron, minding aunt, aya, and missionary wife alike, the quiet guarding of hope. A chaperone's true currency is not prohibition but anticipation, the slow ripening trust that courtship might flower without bruising. Night's hush deepens, and the guardians, different in accent, dress, and prayer, share a single exhale, a whispered benediction over a world still hours from dawn. Beyond the conservatory doors, mist collects upon new pathways, avenues of changing laws, conversations about women's colleges, murmurs of bicycles that promise mobility unfettered by watchful eyes. Those pathways will beckon the guardians of Chapter 9, where the focus shifts to mechanical timekeepers and the mathematics of propriety, the punctual chime of the carriage clock, the railway timetable, and the coded language of invitation cards stamped RSVP. The embers we left glowing in the last drawing room settle now into a deeper hush, their scarlet seams narrowing like tired eyelids. From that waning warmth, the scene drifts outward, past lace curtains and into streets where dawn is only a blue-gray promise. In this gentle hour, the presence of the chaperone, once as solid as the hearth itself, begins to thin like rising smoke, difficult to catch, undeniable, yet already on its way to somewhere else. First comes the whisper of iron rims on gravel. The 1870s had flirted with the high-wheeler, but by the 1890s, the safety bicycle purrs along country lanes and city crescents alike, its chain humming an almost subversive lullaby. No liveried footman opens a carriage door here. No matronly guardian rearranges shawls. Instead, a young woman steadies her balance, gathers her skirts, and pedals into the wide outside world on her own terms. She does so in daylight, when all can see, yet the very visibility that once demanded surveillance now acts as protection. Propriety finds itself outsprinted by velocity. Telegraph poles click past, milestones fade. The house on the hill with its vigilant windows is suddenly far behind. The chaperone, having no saddle of her own, is left at the gate, her authority receding into the dust. Trams and omnibuses soon contribute their basso continuo to this new freedom. For a penny or two, crowded platforms and open-top decks shuttle clerks to offices, shop girls to arcades, and pupils to lecture halls. Where the private carriage enabled strict supervision, one guardian, one charge, public transport muddles the caste list. In that jostling anonymity, the old calculus of reputation proves hard to solve. Who could possibly chaperone an entire carriage at rush hour? The conductors punch tickets, not pedigrees. Courtesy survives. Gentlemen tip hats, ladies incline heads. But the ratio of watcher to watched unfurls beyond control. The city itself becomes a rolling salon, moving too quickly for the rigid stop motion of yesterday's etiquette. With mobility comes mingling. Educational reformers, brandishing syllabi like lanterns, break open cloisters that once kept sons and daughters in separate realms. Mixed-gender classrooms appear first in small provincial colleges, then surge across nations like a tide pulled by scholarship and industrial need. Library long tables stretch to accommodate both violet ribbons and ink-stained neckties. The hush of study, once considered a fragile vessel easily cracked by feminine chatter, proves resilient. Nothing shatters when male and female eyes meet over Latin declensions. Professors offer lectures rather than guardianship, and the chaperone's chair at the rear of the hall remains vacant, gathering chalk dust instead of gossip. Emerging from lecture at twilight, students spill into quadrangles fragrant with wet stone. Conversations linger about Nietzsche, about swallows looping under arches, about weekend cycling excursions. Every doorway is watched, but not by family retainers, rather by time itself, inexorable and modern. The presence that shepherded debutantes through ballrooms simply cannot multiply to shepherd scholars through cloisters, laboratories, or debating societies. Freedom, once incremental, slips into ubiquity almost unnoticed. While classrooms and carriage roofs foster mingling by necessity, Edwardian drawing rooms experiment by desire. Here, the chaperone's eclipse is a social art project, curated by hostesses who scent an opportunity and seize it with gloved hands. The afternoon tea elongates into the 5 o'clock cocktail. Sherry decanters are replaced by delicate jiggers of gin, vermouth, and bitters. The hostess, perched like a hummingbird on an Aubusson footstool, orchestrates introductions with a wink, then retreats behind a fan of conversation topics: Art Nouveau, motorcars, suffrage, spiritualism. Under soft lamplight, men and women share settees without the interposing silhouette of an older cousin. The very setting advertises safety, plenty of chaperones in theory, yet none in practice. Everyone sees everything, therefore no one must guard anything at all. The cocktail itself becomes a miniature passport stamped with independence. It is mixed, stirred, tasted, a performance far more intimate than simply sipping lemonade under an elder's watchful eye. Recipes are exchanged, not family credentials. To know how to balance the acidity of citrus against the sweetness of liqueur is the new marker of polish. Conversation tilts from lineage toward experience. In such rooms, the chaperone's value proposition withers quietly, who needs a vigilant intermediary when decorum is diluted, sweetened, and served at room temperature. Yet nothing accelerates change like the cannon's roar. When 1914 ruptures the continent, social timetables fracture along with railway schedules. Men march, women staff hospitals, munitions factories, and correspondence offices. What once required permission now demands participation. Propriety bows to patriotism. A fiancé cycles alone across muddy fields to deliver telegrams. A widow rides a midnight tram in blackout London to supervise refugee billets. The shared adversity of wartime compresses gendered space until distinctions blur like ink in rain. Under zeppelins and searchlights, no one inquires who is chaperoning whom. Survival proves a sturdier credential than supervision. When silence returns in 1918, trenches lie quiet, but the old hierarchies cannot be reassembled with the same ease as memorial wreaths. Those who tasted autonomy during wartime do not forget its flavor. Households mourn, economies reel, but there is also a curious lightness, a sense that certain formalities have been interred alongside fallen regiments. Families, grateful simply to gather for supper, seldom summon an aunt to hover at the parlor doorway. Couples walk together in subdued streets, grief serving as its own solemn escort. Publishers, always keen to reflect and direct social currents, release etiquette manuals conveying a final, almost apologetic nod to the vanishing guardian. Editions printed between 1920 and 1929 still allocate pages to chaperonage, yet the sections shrink like receding shorelines on a tidal map. A paragraph here, a cautionary footnote there, phrases couched in the past tense. A young lady would once have been expected to. The language grows wistful, even elegiac. Illustrations show silhouettes rather than portraits, as though the illustrator cannot find a living model. The implied reader learns more about telephone courtesy, jazz-age slang, and automobile picnics than about recruiting protective escorts. Historians sometimes frame this as abrupt disappearance, but in truth the fate is gradual, quieter than velvet footsteps on a stair runner. Guardianship dissolves not through rebellion but through incremental pragmatism. A bicycle chain, a tram schedule, a university timetable, a cocktail shaker, a mobilization order, a typeset page. Each element shaves a sliver from the edifice until only gossamer remains. Chaperones are not deposed. They are rendered gently surplus. Consider an ordinary London evening in 1925. An invitation arrives on cream stock embossed with silver trellises. It requests the pleasure of Miss Pollard's company at a jazz-infused soirée, 8 p.m., no chaperone mentioned. She selects a dropped-waist frock and a cloche hat, staples of a new silhouette that disguise parental scrutiny as fashion. Her parents, themselves veterans of strained wartime goodbyes, nod assent. A taxi rattles through Chelsea. Headlights sweep over brick facades. The driver does not ask who safeguards his passenger. At the townhouse door, a butler takes her wrap, and she drifts into a room alive with saxophone, laughter, and the clink of cocktail glasses. The hostess floats by, offers a smile, and disappears into the swirl, an impresario rather than a sentinel. Something of the old order survives in posture, in the measured dip of eyelashes, in the deliberate way a cigarette is accepted from a silver case. Yet the scaffold of supervision has collapsed. Courtship, once a choreographed minuet under chandeliers, now improvises to syncopated rhythms. The chaperone's former wards navigate with instinct and occasional misstep, guided less by rigid protocol than by a broader, if still imperfect, sense of mutual consent. Even in rural districts, change meanders in along wheel ruts and telephone wires. Village fêtes feature bicycles parked against stone walls, their skirts guards dangled like sleepy pennants. Schoolhouses combine grammar pupils of both sexes to economize scarce staff, and the headmistress's eye must cover arithmetic rather than flirtation. Field paths that once required an elder's arm now welcome Sunday strolls unencumbered. Roses still bloom, church bells still call, but the interval between meeting and engagement stretches or contracts according to personal preference, not to a schedule ratified by drawing-room sentinels. It would be tempting to declare the chaperone entirely extinct, yet echoes persist. A godmother writes a guiding letter, a brother offers to accompany a sister on a late-night walk, a neighbor peeks through curtains more from habit than hostility. But these gestures operate on invitation rather than decree. Guardianship no longer possesses the weight of stone. It hovers like dust motes in sunbeams, visible, drifting, beautiful in its obsolescence. As the night deepens, our contemplation of decline slows to the tempo of a last dance. A gramophone languidly spins Ain't Misbehavin'. Couples sway, edges blurred, responsibilities self-assigned. Outside, bicycles lean asleep against lampposts, their spokes glinting like faint constellations. Somewhere, a solitary etiquette manual rests on a bedside table, ribbon bookmarks slid between pages that few will consult. The page describes the suitable number of chaperones on a winter sleigh ride. Snow melts, ink remains, but relevance slips quietly downstream. We draw the curtains on this chapter as dawn begins its pale rehearsal along the horizon. Shadows lengthen then dissolve. just as the shadow guardians themselves have done. In the hush that follows, new questions emerge about what filled the space they vacated, questions to be pondered when we next consider how affection negotiated its passage through the modern century. Just as the ballroom's final candle guttered to a quiet blue ember, and the velvet drapes fell against the windows like sleepy eyelids, we stepped softly from yesterday's parlor into the hushed corridors of our present. The waltz has faded, but its echo remains, lingering in unexpected alcoves of modern life. Tonight, in this concluding hour, allow those echoes to carry us, slowly, gently, through the campuses that still ring curfew bells, through the flats where GPS pings glimmer like digital fireflies, and through the daydreamed pages of paperback romances where a steadfast guardian still waits at every bend in the moonlit lane. We begin at the university gate. Imagine, if you will, ancient bricks overgrown with ivy, yet crowned by a discreet motion sensor glowing in pale green. It is midnight, and a student returning from the library swipes their card against a panel. Permission granted, the door hushes open. A century ago, matrons in stiff lace collars performed that same silent audit, marking time and arrival in ledgers scented faintly of ink and lavender. They called their rules parietals, regulations that dictated when young women, and sometimes young men, might visit the dormitories of the opposite sex, how long they could linger, and precisely when doors must close. The vocabulary has changed, quiet hours, residence life policies, security protocols, but the impulse hums on, a guardian hand folding the night shut around the wanderer, ostensibly to preserve propriety, safety, or sometimes simply tradition itself. Let the image slow. Feel the autumn chill seep into the quad stone benches, the lamp above casting a deliberate halo. Our student lingers, maybe checking a phone, maybe whispering good night to unseen company. A century and a half earlier, a similar hush would be supervised by a vigilant chaperone rocking gently on a carriage step, sleeves rustling like restless wings. The difference is attire, perhaps intention, yet the choreography retains its recognizable shape. Rules of space, rules of time, rules of contact, each stitched carefully around tender possibility, each defining how desire might move within its narrow hedge, like roses trained upon a trellis, so they bloom in organized beauty, never sprawling. If we drift farther, past the dormitories into neighborhood streets, we meet curfews less formal, but no less real. Municipal ordinances humming after dusk, residence hall check-ins requiring electronic thumbprints, athletic departments that insist recruits share live locations when traveling to away games. Protective? Possibly. Restrictive? Equally. The boundary between care and control proves porous, wavering like gauze in candlelight. And so, as you listen under the dimming glow of your own room, perhaps you sense that mingled breeze, the protective warmth of someone hoping you reach home safely, and the faint tug of invisible reins. Now let the scene dissolve into pixels. A mother's phone lights up at 10:07 p.m. Her teenager's avatar pulses on the map, a tiny blue dot sliding slowly toward a cul-de-sac. She sighs, relieved. All is well. A century ago, she might have waited by the window, straining for the clip-clop of returning hooves. Tonight, she watches lithesome satellites complete their orbital ballet, streaming reassurance straight to her palm. Life 360, Find My, Google Family Link, the names form a quiet new lexicon of guardianship. Each app offers settings, geofences, arrival alerts, battery levels, even driving speed readouts. They feel on certain evenings like soft blankets pulled up to the chin of collective anxiety. Yet they also carry the creak of a door that may never fully close again. Privacy, once surrendered, resembles toothpaste squeezed from its tube, difficult to coax back inside without visible creases. Notice how gently the GPS pulsations echo the tap of a Victorian companion's parasol on limestone. Rhythmic, persistent, coded with meaning. The parasol asked, "Where are you headed, my dear? With whom? How long?" The app in a pocket wonders the same, but with satellite clarity. For some, the digital companion frees the mind. For others, it shackles. Somewhere within that tension lies the heart of tonight's meditation. Safeguarding versus surveillance. Comforting, escort versus constant observer. Before we lean fully into that debate, allow the mind to wander through paperback aisles gleaming under fluorescent glow. Rows of romance novels stand shoulder to shoulder like confident suitors in midnight tailcoats. Their covers promise protective arms, steadfast rides through stormy moors, bodyguards who watch every doorway, dukes who ensure safe passage along garden paths. It is 2023, yet the bestseller list still thrums with guardianship fantasies. We read them beneath quilts knit from our own inheritances, a longing for safety twined with an equally strong longing to choose for ourselves. The Victorian chaperone resurfaces wearing leather jackets, tactical vests, or billionaire suits, but the promise endures. Danger shall not pass while I stand watch. Let the pages turn quietly. You notice the familiar beats. Heroine steps into unknown alley, hero materializes to guide her home. The narrative lullaby repeats, a protective rhythm that mimics your breathing until eyelids grow heavy. We are taught, across centuries and genres, that real love remains close enough to guard, yet wise enough to let us wander just far enough to learn. That delicate balance thrums like a lullaby's pulse. Now, dear listener, we tiptoe toward ethics. Picture a delicate scale set upon a walnut desk, its brass trays warmed by late-night lamplight. On one side, we rest the coin of safeguarding, the deep, evolutionary urge to shelter our own, children, students, companions from harm. On the opposite tray, we lay the coin of autonomy, the right to move, to choose, to slip into midnight gardens purely because we wish to feel the dew on our fingertips. Tonight, as you settle deeper into pillows, the scale tilts first one way, then the other, in a motion so slow it resembles stillness. Advocates of modern guardianship point to safety statistics, reduced accidents, quicker rescues, fewer lost wanderers. They follow the data the way a Victorian aunt followed the crisp etiquette manuals, chapter and verse. Yet critics raise a lantern too, illuminating every subtle cost. The internalization of mistrust, the creeping expectation that someone is always watching, the way curiosity becomes self-censored and spontaneity folds its wings. The argument floats between them like a drowsy moth, never settling long enough to be pinned down. Breathe here. Inhale the faint scent of old paper and new silicone. Exhale the comparisons that no longer serve. For in truth, the debate is less a duel of absolutes than a weather pattern, shifting with context, culture, and individual longing. Some nights we crave the chaperone's steady arm. Other nights we slip free, dancing barefoot through wet grass, content to let the moon keep watch alone. Turn your gaze now to the gentle montage unfurling at the close of our study. First, a Victorian garden party freezes mid-curtsy, petals drift, suspended around parasols and lace gloves. Slowly, the scene dissolves into a 20th century dorm hallway echoing with laughter, an RA checking wristwatches discreetly. That hallway blurs into the glowing screen of a smartphone, its map speckled with moving orbs. Finally, everything quiets into darkness, edged by morning violet, an open horizon where each of us, untethered or tended, chooses a path. What have these 10 chapters offered? A soft lantern held high over customs that once seemed quaint, even obsolete, the polite cough of a chaperone clearing her throat in a garden alcove, the murmured approval of a dance card initialed in careful graphite, the unspoken contract that someone, somewhere, bore responsibility for safeguarding a heart not yet seasoned by disappointment. In tracing those rituals, we unearth their shadows in our own routines, recognize that the silhouette of escort and observer still strolls beside us, though the garb has changed. Perhaps then, studying Victorian chaperones teaches us less about courtship's rigid past and more about the continuous calibration of freedom and protection. Autonomy is not a single, unbreakable line. It is a ribbon fluttering in variable wind. And guardianship, when offered with tenderness, need not become surveillance, just as observation, when wielded with respect, need not smother the bright spark of self-determination. The lesson is humility. To ask each dawn whether the safeguard we build today might become the shackle of tomorrow, and to listen closely for the answer, whispered in real time by those it affects. Feel your breath now, slow and rhythmic. Picture a final Victorian lamplighter making his rounds, taper held aloft. With each lamp he quenches, the sky's deep indigo grows richer, until only the stars remain, distant, watchful, patient, yet too far away to trespass upon private dreams. In that widening darkness, you are both protected and free, secured by cosmic quiet, released into your own night journey. Allow my voice to lower, warm as a shawl drawn over slumbering shoulders. I thank you sincerely for accompanying me through grand ballrooms, railway carriages, seaside promenades, and now into algorithmic constellations. Together, we have watched the outlines of Guardian's past merge with those of the present, noting where they comfort, where they constrain. Let these reflections settle like fine dust upon a shelf of memories, visible only when morning light drifts in at just the right angle, reminding you of thoughts once pondered in the hush before sleep. If ever you feel the weight of eyes upon your path, be they loving, worried, or merely curious, may you recall the chaperones of old and negotiate anew the distance that feels right to you. Step closer when you need the lantern's glow. Step away when your own inner compass thrums bright. May autonomy and care never feel like rivals in your story, but rather like dancers who know when to lead and when to let go. And now, as the final pages close and the last carriage rolls softly beyond the gate, I bid you a restful night. May dreams unfold at a pace that suits your heart, and may you wake with a gentle understanding that the choices ahead are yours to navigate, lit by the wisdom of history and the kindness of those who walk beside you. Good night, dear listener, and thank you for every quiet moment of attention, for every sigh mirrored in candlelight, and for trusting Rosewater Revelations to guard your reverie, if only for a while.